I'm Frank Delaney. I'm 68 years old, and it took my own daughter to teach me that blood doesn't guarantee loyalty. Money reveals who people really are. 6 weeks ago, at the dinner meant to celebrate my late wife's memory, my daughter slammed her wine glass down so hard it cracked in her hand and told me I was an embarrassment to this family. I didn't say a word back to her. I just stood up, walked out, and by sunrise the next day, every account she thought she controlled belonged to someone else entirely. Before I tell you how I got here, let me know where you're watching from tonight, my friend. And if you've ever had someone close to you underestimate exactly what you're capable of, hit that like button right now. Charleston, South Carolina. It was a warm October evening, the kind where the humidity still clings to the air even after the sun goes down, thick and heavy like the grief I still carried every day since I lost Eleanor. We were at Halyard's, the private steakhouse downtown where I'd been a member for almost 20 years. I was paying, same as always. The dinner was supposed to honor Eleanor's memory, 4 years to the day since the cancer took her. It was just me, my 38-year-old daughter Rachel, and her husband Marcus. Rachel had taken over as CEO of Delaney Marine Supply exactly 14 months earlier. I'd stepped back into the chairman role, told myself it was time to let the next generation steer the ship I'd spent my whole life building from a single dock warehouse into a $42 million company serving ports up and down the eastern seaboard. Marcus sat beside her, a hedge fund guy who'd never worked an honest day with his hands in his life, sipping a glass of something French and looking at his watch like he had somewhere better to be. The restaurant was warm and quiet, soft music playing, the kind of place where waiters know your name and your order before you say a word. But our table felt like a courtroom. Rachel had been distant for months, cold. I told myself it was the pressure of the new job. I was wrong. When the plates were cleared, I reached into my jacket and pulled out my checkbook. I set it on the tablecloth and looked at my daughter, searching her face for some trace of her mother. "I've been thinking about your mom this week," I said, keeping my voice steady. She always wanted to finish that children's wing at the hospital, the one she volunteered at for 15 years. So tomorrow, I'm writing a check for $60,000 to get it done, for her. I expected a nod, maybe tears. Instead, Rachel's face twisted into something I didn't recognize. She grabbed her wine glass and slammed it down so hard the stem snapped clean in her fist, sending glass and red wine spraying across the white linen like a wound opening up. People at nearby tables turned to stare. She leaned across the table, her eyes wild, her voice low and venomous, so only we could hear it. $60,000? To a hospital? Are you out of your mind? That's my inheritance you're throwing away, Dad. Under the table, I heard Marcus kick her shin, his eyes darting nervously at the other diners. Rachel barely flinched. Her glare stayed locked on me, burning with something ugly. I didn't yell. I didn't raise my hand. I just went completely still, staring at the stranger sitting across from me wearing my daughter's face, my inheritance. She'd called my money the money I broke my back for over 4 decades, unloading crates on that dock at 5 in the morning before the sun even thought about rising hers. I had frozen on ship decks in January, storms. I had slept in my truck more nights than I could count during the lean years, so she'd never know what it felt like to go without. I stepped back for 1 year. Just one, and her sense of entitlement had curdled into something monstrous. The whole restaurant held its breath, waiting for the old man to make a scene. But I am not a man who fights in public. I picked up my checkbook, slid it back into my jacket, stood up slow and straight, dropped $200 on the ruined tablecloth to cover the meal, and walked out into the warm Charleston night without looking back. I didn't feel the humidity anymore. My mind was clear. My heart was broken, but it was beating with a new, cold purpose. The war for my life had already started, and I intended to win it. I woke before dawn the next morning, same as I had every day for 40 years running that company. The house felt like a museum without Eleanor in it. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen island, watching the gray morning light creep over the marsh grass behind our property on James Island. My mind kept replaying the shattered glass, the venom in Rachel's eyes, the word my. By 8 o'clock, there was a knock at my door. Rachel and Marcus stood on my porch. Marcus holding a ridiculous fruit basket wrapped in cellophane with a gold bow. Rachel in a cashmere wrap looking like she'd rehearsed her expression in the car. "Dad, Rachel said, her voice smaller than the roar she'd used the night before. "Can we come in? We need to talk." Every instinct in me said to shut the door, but a good businessman never slams a door until he knows what's being sold. I let them in. They sat close together on my leather sofa like two kids called to the principal's office. I took my chair by the window and waited. In negotiations, the first one to speak first usually loses. Rachel cracked first. "Dad, I am so sorry about last night," she said, her voice thick with rehearsed remorse. The pressure of running the company were expanding into the Savannah and Norfolk ports at the same time, and the shipping delays are eating me alive. I haven't slept right in weeks. I had too much wine on an empty stomach and I said something horrible. That's not who I am. She was blaming the wine. She was blaming the company. She was taking zero responsibility for what had come out of her mouth. Before I could respond, Marcus leaned forward and placed a hand on her knee, looking at me with practiced concern. "It's the truth, Frank," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "Rachel's been working herself to the bone to make you proud. But honestly, we've both been worried about you, living alone in this big house for 4 years now. Grief does strange things to a person's judgment." My blood went cold and still. "Worried about me?" I asked. "Yes," Marcus continued without missing a beat. "You're so generous, Frank, sometimes too generous. There have been news stories lately. Elder financial abuse, scammers targeting wealthy widowers who live alone, people manipulating grief to get big donations out of them. When you pulled out that checkbook last night, Rachel panicked because she wants to protect you. She meant to say, our family's money, not my inheritance. She's just terrified someone's taking advantage of you." It was a brilliant lie. She smiled and tilted her head. "That's why we quietly set up a family protection trust last week," Marcus added. "Just a standard safety measure for high net worth seniors, to shield your assets from predators." I nodded slowly, softening my face, pretending to accept it. But deep down, 40 years of business instinct screamed at me. Family Protection Trust sounded exactly like a legal cage with a friendly name. After they left, I needed air. I went out to my garage and pulled the cover off my 1979 Chevy pickup. The first vehicle I ever bought with cash from the company, forest green, no digital anything, just steel and honest combustion. I drove out to Sonny's, a small independent mechanic shop on the industrial side of town, for a scheduled tune-up. Sonny was a good man who worked with his hands. The bill came to $390, nothing for a man in my position. I handed him my black card. He swiped it. It declined. He swiped it again. Declined again. "Frank, I'm real sorry," Sonny said quietly. Card saying declined. I'd never had a card declined in my life. I stepped outside and called Harold, my private banker of 22 years. A man who normally answered on the first ring with genuine respect in his voice. This time, it rang 7 times. When he finally picked up, his voice was shaking. "Frank," he stammered, "I am so sorry. I don't have the authorization to release those funds anymore." "What are you talking about, Harold? It's my money." "Please, listen carefully," he whispered. "This morning, Rachel came in with 3 attorneys and a signed court order. Your accounts haven't been flagged for fraud, Frank. They've been frozen under an emergency conservatorship. Rachel has temporary legal control over all of your personal finances." The warm October air suddenly felt like ice against my skin. The Family Protection Trust wasn't a shield. It was a weapon aimed straight at my independence. They weren't protecting my money. They had legally locked me out of my own life. I didn't waste time cursing the sky. I got back in my truck and drove straight to the downtown headquarters of Delaney Marine Supply, the building I had laid the foundation for with my own 2 hands 25 years earlier. I parked away from my reserved spot, walked in quiet, and headed for the executive elevator. I held up my founder's badge, the one that had given me access to every floor in this building for a quarter century. The scanner blinked red. Access denied. I swiped again. Same red light. Derek, no. Rachel had purged me from the building's entire security system. I was a ghost inside the walls I'd paid to build. I stepped back and blended into the lobby, watching the flow of employees, until I spotted a nervous young intern juggling a stack of boxes and 4 coffees, fumbling his badge at the turnstile. I slipped in right behind him as the doors opened. "Left my badge upstairs, son. Hit the button for the top floor for me, would you?" He did, without a second thought. The elevator carried me up into occupied territory. I stepped off onto the executive floor and moved toward the corner office that used to belong to my CFO. Through the parted blinds, I saw Marcus behind the mahogany desk. No title, no business degree, sipping sparkling water, wearing a Rolex that cost more than most people's cars, signing a stack of documents on my company's letterhead. Property transfer deeds. He was liquidating our warehouse holdings, converting brick and steel into liquid cash with zero board approval. My chest burned, but my mind stayed cold. Confrontation without leverage is just noise. I memorized the scene and walked away. I knew better than to trust the company's legal department, whose paychecks were now signed by Rachel. I needed someone loyal only to me. I drove 40 minutes out to a quiet diner off Highway 17, the kind of place where nobody asks questions, and found Walt Pruitt in the back booth, nursing black coffee. Walt had been my attorney for 30 years before he retired to go fishing, and he had a brilliant legal mind with zero patience for people who crossed his clients. "You look like a man who watched his own funeral," Walt said. I laid out everything: the dinner, the shattered glass, the fake apology, the frozen accounts, the conservatorship, Marcus signing away our warehouses. Walt's face went hard and serious. "A conservatorship isn't something you throw together overnight, Frank. They'd need a doctor to sign off on your mental incapacity. This has been planned for months." "I need to know how deep this goes," I said. "Tonight." Walt pulled out his laptop right there on the sticky table and dug into the county records and judicial databases. His jaw tightened. "The Family Protection Trust is real," he said, "but it's not protecting anything of yours. It's an irrevocable trust naming Rachel as trustee. They've already moved most of your liquid assets into it." Then he pulled up something else: property records for my house on James Island, the home Eleanor and I raised our daughter in, the home I paid off 19 years ago. My name was gone from the deed. In its place, Rachel and Marcus Whitfield, sole owners, transfer dated 3 weeks earlier. My signature forged flawlessly at the bottom. My blood ran cold. If I went home and confronted them, they could have me arrested for trespassing in what used to be my own house. I didn't go home. I checked into a motel off the interstate, paid cash, and sat on the lumpy mattress thinking. Rachel believed that because I never bothered learning the new cloud software, I was blind to how the company worked underneath. She'd forgotten the old server room in the basement, the one I had installed with my own hands 25 years ago, still wired as a hardwired failsafe tied to nothing but my own fingerprint and retina. No password, just my body. I called Denny Ruiz, a private investigator I'd kept on retainer for years, met him at midnight in an empty parking lot, and handed him cash for a military-grade encrypted hard drive. He asked no questions. At 2 in the morning, I parked 2 blocks from the headquarters and slipped through the old maintenance tunnel behind a rusted dumpster, one I'd insisted on building decades ago, completely off the grid from Marcus's expensive new camera system. I pried open the iron grate with a crowbar and crawled through the dark, splashing through shallow puddles until I reached the reinforced steel door at the end, opened with a brass skeleton key I'd carried for 20 years. Inside the basement server room, I pressed my palm against the old biometric scanner. A red light swept across my hand. Then the retinal scanner pulsed against my eye. 3 agonizing seconds passed in silence. Then a satisfying mechanical clack, and the heavy door released. I plugged the hard drive into the mainframe and began pulling 12 months of hidden accounting. While it downloaded, I dug through the ledgers myself. On the surface, everything looked clean. But underneath the legitimate marine equipment invoices, I found a steady weekly wire transfer to something called Coastal Logistics Partners, $42,000 a week, coded as Expedited Freight Consulting. The company didn't exist in our system before last spring. A quick search through the state registry showed it was a shell company registered to a P.O. box in Delaware. I found 5 more shells after that: Tidewater Strategic Group, Harborline Consulting, Atlantic Fleet Advisory, each one bleeding hundreds of thousands from our operating capital under vague administrative fees. Over the past year, Rachel had quietly embezzled nearly $3.8 million, but that alone wouldn't bankrupt a $42 million company. The cash flow numbers were flashing something far worse. Buried in a folder labeled offshore collateral, I found it. Rachel had pledged our entire physical fleet, every tugboat, every warehouse, every crane, against massive leveraged accounts overseas, funneling borrowed capital into speculative foreign currency trades and volatile crypto markets. If those margin calls came due, international lenders would seize everything. My knuckles went white on the server rack. She had called me the one wasting money at that dinner while she gambled away everything I built. The transfer hit 100%. I sealed the door behind me and crawled back through the tunnel. I had the financial proof, but I needed to know their next move. I climbed the stairwell instead of the elevator, 25 stories, my 68-year-old lungs burning with every flight, until I reached the executive suite. I bypassed the biometric lock on Marcus's office with a small magnetic tool Denny had given me weeks earlier. Inside, moonlight spilled across the renovated office. My old oak desk replaced with imported marble. A private bar stocked with scotch that cost more than my first delivery van. I found a heavy brass lamp on the corner of the desk, one I'd actually given Rachel the day she was promoted, meant to symbolize passing the torch. I unscrewed the base, wired in a coin-sized audio transmitter Denny had supplied, spliced it into the lamp's own power line so the battery would never die, and put everything back exactly as it was. Then I wiped my fingerprints and slipped away into the night. For 3 days, I lived out of my truck in the back corner of a coffee shop parking lot, with a clear view of the building, an earpiece pressed into my ear, surviving on black coffee and stale sandwiches, listening to the mundane hum of my daughter running my company into the ground. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, I heard the office door swing open. Sharp heels on marble. Marcus. "Did the medical certificate clear the county clerk yet?" Rachel's voice, tight with anxiety. "That doctor charged us $60,000 in cash to backdate the whole evaluation. If there's a delay, I swear to God." My hands went cold on the steering wheel. "A doctor. Backdated paperwork." Marcus laughed, low and satisfied. "Relax. It's done. The judge signed off on the diagnosis this morning. Early-stage vascular dementia, fully documented. 3 years of fabricated history. The permanent conservatorship is officially ours." The words hit me like a fist to the chest. They hadn't just frozen my accounts. They had convinced a judge, with fraudulent medical paperwork, that my mind itself was broken. I was a healthy, sharp 68-year-old man, and in the eyes of the law, I was about to become a diagnosed invalid, entirely dependent on a daughter who despised me. Then Rachel's voice again, colder. "The transport's scheduled for Friday, 9 in the morning. They're taking him straight to Marshview." Marshview. I knew the name. A grim, overcrowded state facility on the edge of the county. The kind of place people disappeared into and were never really heard from again. Marcus laughed. "Once he's locked in the memory ward, nobody believes a word he says. He starts screaming about embezzlement. They sedate him and write it up as paranoid delusion. He's neutralized. We wire the $11 million to the Cayman account Thursday night," Rachel said. "File for bankruptcy Monday. We tell everyone Dad mismanaged the company during his cognitive decline." I sat frozen in the dark, the truck heater ticking, understanding for the first time the full, breathtaking shape of their plan. They were going to chemically silence me and bury me under a mountain of paperwork, then vanish with everything. I pulled the earpiece out. Friday, 9 a.m., they'd come for me. Thursday at midnight, $11 million would disappear to the Cayman Islands. Monday, my life's work would collapse into bankruptcy, with my forged signature on every fraudulent document. They believed I'd be asleep and unaware. They didn't know I had the hard drive. They didn't know I had the recording. I drove straight through the night to Walt's house in Mount Pleasant, pounded on his door at 4 in the morning. He took one look at my face and let me in without a word. I played him the recording. He listened in silence, his jaw tightening with every sentence, until it clicked off and the room went dead quiet. For nearly an hour, Walt traced the offshore accounts, following the 6 shell companies to an unregulated crypto exchange based in Eastern Europe. Rachel hadn't just been stealing to fund a lifestyle. She'd lost nearly $18 million gambling on volatile digital currency using our company's credit as collateral. And the $11 million she planned to wire out Thursday night was the last liquid cash left in the entire company. Her getaway money, before the whole thing collapsed. "Frank," Walt said, standing up, pacing. The federal government is already investigating these exact crypto platforms for money laundering. It's only a matter of time before they trace this straight back to Delaney Marine. She isn't just stealing from you. She's framing you to take the fall for federal wire fraud while she disappears. My daughter had engineered the ultimate scapegoat. I would spend the last years of my life drugged in a memory ward, my forged signature on every illegal transfer, unable to say a single word in my own defense, while the real thieves vanished into the sunset. "We need to call the FBI right now," Walt said. I shook my head. "If the feds freeze those accounts today, that money sits in limbo for a decade. The company defaults on payroll by Friday afternoon. 200 employees lose their jobs and their health insurance because of my daughter's greed. I won't let that happen. I need to move that money before the government even knows it exists." Walt frowned. "You don't have the legal authority anymore, Frank. Rachel holds the executive keys." "She holds the administrative keys," I said quietly. "She doesn't hold the foundational ones. Pull up the original corporate charter, Section 6, Paragraph 3. Walt's fingers flew across the keyboard. He found it, and his face went pale. "The poison pill," he whispered. "I completely forgot we wrote this in. 25 years ago, mistrusting the corporate world even then, I'd had Walt bury a clause deep in the company's founding documents. If the sitting CEO is ever found defrauding the company, the founder retains unilateral authority to revoke all executive power and seize every liquid asset. No board vote required. A legal guillotine, built to activate only with undeniable proof. I have the shadow ledgers," I said. "I have the offshore fraud documentation. I have a recording of her admitting to bribing a doctor to steal my legal rights. Draft the declaration. Tonight." For 48 hours, Walt and I worked in total secrecy, building the legal framework, mapping the routing numbers for a new holding account Rachel had no knowledge of. I barely slept. I survived on coffee and adrenaline. Thursday night arrived heavy and silent. At 11:55, 5 minutes before Rachel planned to wire $11 million overseas, I sat in front of my laptop in Walt's home office and pressed the command key. The screen flashed white, then opened directly into the corporate banking portal, bypassing every modern firewall Rachel had installed, sliding straight through on the old hardwired root access I'd built into the system decades before anyone thought to lock me out of my own creation. I pressed my thumb against a small fingerprint scanner. The machine hummed, verified, chimed. I was in, full control, no board approval required. I found the pending wire, $11.6 million sitting in a holding account, scheduled to hit the Caymans at 8 sharp Friday morning, exactly 1 hour before the transport team would arrive at my front door. I moved the cursor over the transfer and canceled it without a shred of hesitation. The money snapped back into the vault. But stopping the theft wasn't enough. I found Rachel and Marcus's joint personal account, fattened with 3 years of stolen consulting fees, $610,000 sitting there waiting to fund their tropical escape. I merged both sums, $11.6 million and $610,000, into a single figure glowing green on the screen. $12.2 million. The entirety of my life's work. I thought about the fake diagnosis. I thought about the doctor they'd bribed. I thought about the transport team scheduled to drag me out of my own home in 9 hours. I clicked once, twice. A warning appeared, telling me the transfer was irreversible. I clicked a third time. The screen flashed green. Transfer successful. Every dollar locked permanently into an irrevocable trust in South Dakota, protected by ironclad asset laws, untouchable by bankruptcy courts or federal seizure, reserved for legitimate charity and future honest generations. I refreshed Rachel and Marcus's personal account one last time. $0. Completely wiped clean, as if it had never existed. But financial ruin alone wasn't justice. I opened a secure folder and compiled everything: the fabricated dementia diagnosis, the $60,000 bribe receipt, the audio recording of Rachel and Marcus laughing about locking me in Marshview, the offshore crypto ledgers, the forged property deed. I routed the entire package through an encrypted network to the FBI's white-collar crime division and the IRS Criminal Investigation Unit, signed only as a concerned family member. I hit send. The message delivered. The trap was sealed. I drove back to my house one last time before sunrise, packed a single duffel bag with a few changes of clothes, my documents, my shaving kit, and left the suits and gold watches behind. In the kitchen, I laid the evidence out on the marble island, the fake diagnosis, the forged deed, my old phone queued up to the exact recording. I grabbed a red marker and wrote on a sheet of paper, "Don't bother calling the ambulance, and don't bother checking the bank account either." I left it right there on the counter and walked out the front door for the last time. I drove south on I-95, the humid Carolina morning giving way to the open road, heading for a quiet stretch of coastline in Georgia where nobody knew my name. Around 8:15, a burner phone I'd bought with cash rang from the passenger seat. I picked it up and said nothing. "Dad, what did you do?" Rachel screamed, her voice cracking apart. "The money's gone. I tried the transfer and the whole account is locked. I checked our personal account. It says zero. There's nothing left. The FBI is in the lobby right now with warrants. They're taking the hard drives. Dad, please, you have to fix this." I kept my eyes on the road. "You told me to stop wasting your money," I said calmly. "I did exactly that. I secured the funds, I exposed the fraud, and I handed your crypto ledgers straight to the federal government. I'm simply doing what you asked. Enjoy the bankruptcy." I hung up, rolled down the window, and threw the broken phone out onto the shoulder, watching it scatter into the gravel behind me. If you're listening to this and you've spent your whole life building something for people who look at your sacrifice as their entitlement, hear me clearly. Love your children with everything you have, but never let that love blind you to the truth in front of you. Trust is a gift, but blind trust is a weapon you hand to the people closest to you. If the ones you raised see your life's work as something owed to them instead of something earned, protect yourself before it's too late. A real legacy isn't a pile of money left behind for people who never respected you. It's keeping your dignity and having the courage to walk away when you have to. If this story meant something to you, hit that like button for an old man who fought back. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from tonight? And what would you have done in my place? Stay strong out there.